The jungle had always been Japan's greatest ally. For years, Japanese infantry believed dense jungle warfare was where they held absolute superiority. Thick foliage erased numerical disadvantages, narrow trails limited American vehicles, visibility collapsed to just a few meters, sound traveled unpredictably, ambushes could be prepared, sprung, and vanished from within minutes. A Japanese doctrine taught one central truth. If the enemy retreated in the jungle, they were weak. If they ran, they were broken. If they fled, they could be destroyed. And for much of the early Pacific War, that belief was correct. Until the Marines learned how to weaponize retreat itself. It began quietly, almost accidentally, during a series of stalled advances where American units found themselves repeatedly ambushed after pushing too aggressively. Japanese units were patient. They allowed Marines to advance just far enough before counterattacking from concealed flanks, killing isolated squads, then fading back into the jungle. American casualties mounted, morale suffered, and most dangerously, Japanese commanders began to believe they fully understood how American units behaved under pressure. That belief would destroy them. The breakthrough came not from high command, but from company-level officers who noticed a recurring pattern in Japanese reactions. Every time Marines appeared to withdraw, Japanese scouts moved forward aggressively, not cautiously, not methodically, aggressively. They chased, they pursued, they exposed themselves. And in the jungle, exposure meant death. The Marines realized something crucial. Japanese forces needed to believe they were winning. So the Marines gave them exactly that illusion. The first deliberate fake retreat was executed after a short, violent clash near a ridgeline covered in thick undergrowth. Marines engaged Japanese forward elements, exchanged fire for several minutes, then abruptly broke contact. They did not fall back slowly. They did not cover their withdrawal carefully. They ran. They shouted. They dropped equipment. They fired wildly into the trees. To Japanese observers, it looked exactly like a collapse. Japanese scouts immediately reported. Enemy breaking, enemy retreating in disorder. Japanese commanders reacted instantly. This was the moment doctrine had trained them for. Pursuit meant annihilation. They ordered forward movement without delay. What they did not know was that the Marines had not retreated blindly. They had withdrawn into a carefully prepared kill zone. American engineers and infantry had spent the previous night shaping the terrain in ways invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look. Shallow fighting pits were concealed beneath leaf cover. Overlapping fields of fire were established behind fallen logs and natural rises. Trip flares and noise traps were positioned far behind the real defensive line, creating the illusion of continued retreat. When the Japanese scouts advanced, they followed fresh Marine footprints, deliberately exaggerated, deliberately obvious, broken branches, drag marks, discarded gear. Everything screamed panic. Japanese troops surged forward, moving faster than usual, rifles raised, bayonets fixed, eager to close and destroy a broken enemy. They walked directly into the trap. The first burst of Marine fire came from 3 directions at once. Japanese soldiers fell before they understood what had happened. Officers shouted for cover, but there was none. The jungle that had always protected them now trapped them in narrow lanes of fire. Grenades detonated from concealed pits. Automatic fire swept the trails. Riflemen engaged targets they had prearranged by memory alone. Within minutes, the Japanese advance disintegrated. Those who survived tried to retreat, But the Marines did not pursue. They vanished. The jungle went silent again. Japanese commanders were confused but not yet alarmed. They concluded the Marines had regrouped elsewhere. The ambush was unfortunate but understandable. After all, the Americans had fled first. That assumption sealed their fate. Over the next weeks, the Marines repeated the tactic again and again, refining it each time. Every fake retreat was slightly different, but the core principle remained unchanged. Convince the Japanese they were winning, then destroy them when they overcommitted. Marines learned how to retreat just far enough to trigger pursuit, but not so far that Japanese units became cautious. They learned how to leave behind just enough equipment to look desperate, but not enough to compromise their own combat power. Japanese scouts began reporting the same thing repeatedly. The Americans break contact quickly. They flee when pressed. They lack resolve in jungle fighting. Japanese commanders began adjusting their plans based on this belief. They pushed patrols farther forward. They shortened reconnaissance phases. They accelerated pursuit timelines. Exactly what the Marines wanted. The jungle became a chessboard, and the Marines were playing 3 moves ahead. One of the most devastating uses of the fake retreat occurred near a narrow valley flanked by steep, jungle-covered slopes. Marines engaged a Japanese screening force, then withdrew uphill, leaving behind obvious trails and even wounded men calling for help, another deliberate deception. Japanese forces advanced rapidly, believing they were chasing a collapsing unit. They never noticed the silence. They never noticed the absence of long-range fire. They never noticed the Marines weren't shooting while retreating. Because the Marines were already waiting. As the Japanese column entered the valley floor, Marines opened fire from above. Interlocking machine gun positions swept the center. Mortars, pre-registered during the previous night, dropped shells with brutal accuracy. Riflemen engaged from both slopes. Japanese troops tried to deploy, but the terrain betrayed them. The valley compressed them. The jungle blocked lateral movement. Command and control collapsed almost immediately. Some Japanese soldiers charged uphill in desperation. Others froze. Some attempted to retreat the way they came, but Marines had sealed that route as well. The fight was over in minutes. Afterward, Marine units withdrew again, leaving the battlefield silent and empty. No pursuit. No occupation. Just disappearance. Japanese survivors later described the sensation as fighting ghosts, enemies who ran, vanished, and returned only to kill. The psychological effect was immense. Japanese units began second-guessing every engagement. When Marines retreated, was it real, or was it another trap? But Japanese doctrine left little room for hesitation. Retreating enemies were to be destroyed. Failing to pursue was considered weakness, even dishonor. So they kept chasing. And they kept dying. The fake retreat trap began fracturing Japanese command cohesion. Junior officers were torn between doctrine and survival instincts. Veterans grew cautious, but younger troops pushed forward aggressively, eager to prove themselves. That internal conflict created fatal delays and disorganization. Marines exploited it mercilessly. They staged retreats in rainstorms, knowing Japanese scouts would struggle to hear movement. They staged retreats at night, using darkness to exaggerate chaos. They staged retreats near rivers and ravines, funneling pursuit forces into predictable routes. Each time, the result was the same. Japanese units advanced confidently, then collapsed violently. Within months, entire Japanese formations became hesitant, paranoid, and reactive. Patrols moved slower, communication broke down, commanders delayed decisions, units hesitated at trail junctions, unsure whether forward movement meant victory or death. And hesitation in jungle warfare was fatal. American Marines had done something unprecedented. They had turned Japanese aggression into a weapon against itself. The jungle no longer belonged to Japan. It had become a trap. And this was only the beginning. Japan never recovered after Marines used the fake retreat jungle trap. The first successful use of the fake retreat spread through American units faster than any official report. Not because it was written down, but because the men who saw it work never forgot it. They talked about it quietly at night, around foxholes and ration fires, describing how an entire Japanese force had done exactly what doctrine said it would do, and walked straight into annihilation. Japanese commanders, meanwhile, saw something very different. From their perspective, American Marines had finally cracked. Intercepted reports suggested disorder. Observers claimed U.S. units were pulling back hastily, abandoning equipment, breaking contact too easily. To Japanese officers trained to believe the American soldier lacked spiritual endurance, this looked like confirmation of everything they had been taught. The enemy was retreating. And in jungle warfare, a retreat was an invitation. Japanese infantry doctrine placed enormous emphasis on pursuit. When an enemy withdrew, it was not to be allowed to escape. Retreat meant weakness. Retreat meant opportunity. Retreat meant the moment to destroy morale completely with a decisive, aggressive strike. So when Japanese scouts reported Marines falling back along narrow jungle corridors, leaving behind shell casings, torn equipment, even bodies, commanders did not hesitate. They ordered pursuit. What they did not know, what they could not know, was that the retreat had been planned down to the meter. American Marine officers had studied Japanese pursuit behavior carefully. They knew Japanese units rarely advanced cautiously once they believed the enemy was breaking. They knew formations would tighten, flanks would be ignored, speed would replace security. Scouts would push forward aggressively, often bypassing careful reconnaissance. And that was exactly what the Marines wanted. The jungle trail the Japanese followed was not a natural path. It had been subtly shaped over days. Branches had been cut to suggest hurried movement. Footprints were deliberately inconsistent, implying panic. Ammunition crates were dropped where they could be seen from a distance. A helmet lay half buried in the mud, as if abandoned in fear. Every sign screamed retreat. But just off the trail, sometimes only 10 meters away, were Marines who were very much not retreating. They lay motionless in spider holes covered with leaves. They crouched behind fallen logs with firing lanes already measured. They waited in shallow depressions scraped into the earth just wide enough for a man and a rifle. The jungle was silent. When the Japanese advance elements entered the corridor, they did so with confidence. They moved quickly, rifles at the ready, eyes scanning forward, not to the sides. Officers whispered encouragement. NCOs gestured for speed. The enemy was running. The enemy was beaten. Then the Marines vanished completely. The retreat stopped. The jungle closed in. And the trap snapped shut. The first shots were not random. They were surgical. Marine marksmen targeted officers first. Men with swords, pistols, whistles. Leaders dropped without warning, their bodies falling into the mud mid-command. Confusion rippled instantly through the Japanese column. Before anyone could react, machine guns opened up from concealed positions on both sides of the trail. The fire was not continuous. It was controlled, overlapping bursts designed to pin, disorient, and herd. The Japanese soldiers tried to fan out, but there was nowhere to go. The sides of the trail were thick with brush and concealed Marines. The rear of the column surged forward, unaware of what had happened at the front, compressing the unit even further. And then the Americans did something unexpected. They attacked forward. Marine assault teams burst from cover behind the Japanese advance elements, sealing the trail from both ends. The retreat had reversed direction in an instant. What had looked like withdrawal became encirclement. Japanese soldiers found themselves trapped in a narrow strip of jungle, attacked from front, rear, and flanks simultaneously. Their training told them to charge, their instincts screamed to escape. Their officers were dead or wounded, orders dissolved into shouting. Some tried to rush the machine gun positions. They were cut down before they reached them. Others dropped prone, firing wildly into foliage they could not see through. Grenades exploded against trees, showering fragments harmlessly into leaves. The Marines did not rush, they did not panic. They advanced methodically, tightening the circle, reducing resistance pocket by pocket. Within minutes, the engagement was over. What remained was silence and bodies. When American patrols moved back through the area afterward, they found evidence of how completely the deception had worked. Japanese soldiers had been carrying extra ammunition forward, not defensive supplies. They had advanced without securing flanks. Some units had even removed packs to move faster, believing speed was more important than caution. They had been hunting, and instead they had been harvested. Japanese survivors, few as they were, staggered back to their lines, shaken beyond recognition. They spoke of Americans who disappeared and reappeared, of retreats that were not retreats, of jungle paths that swallowed entire companies. Commanders initially dismissed these accounts as exaggeration, but then it happened again. And again. On another ridge, Marines executed the fake retreat over 2 full days. They allowed Japanese scouts to observe them withdrawing from a strong position at dusk, carrying wounded, burning documents, even arguing loudly in English so the enemy would hear confusion and stress. That night, Japanese forces advanced cautiously, but by morning confidence returned. The Americans were still falling back. The position appeared abandoned. Japanese infantry surged forward at first light. The Marines waited until the center of the column reached a narrow saddle between 2 slopes. Then pre-registered mortars fired, not to kill, but to block. Explosions sealed the exits at both ends of the saddle, throwing dirt and debris across the trail. Immediately after, rifle fire erupted from the slopes above. Marines fired downward into compressed ranks, using gravity and elevation to devastating effect. Every attempt to climb the slopes was met with grenades and close-range fire. Japanese soldiers tried to retreat the way they had come. The trail was gone, blasted, impassable. Some tried to dig in. The ground was too hard. Others charged uphill. They fell in rows. Within half an hour, the Japanese unit ceased to exist as a fighting force. After that engagement, something changed. Japanese commanders began hesitating. Reports of American retreats were no longer trusted automatically. Scouts were ordered to verify. Units were told to advance more slowly. Flanks were reinforced. But hesitation created a new problem. Every delay gave the Marines time to reposition. Every pause allowed them to disappear again. The jungle swallowed American units completely, making it impossible to tell whether a retreat was real or staged. And sometimes, cruelly, it was both. In several engagements, Marines executed partial fake retreats. One platoon would withdraw openly while another remained hidden. Japanese forces would pursue, encounter resistance, pull back, then advance again, never realizing they were being slowly bled by carefully timed ambushes. The psychological damage was profound. Japanese soldiers began to fear movement itself. Advancing felt dangerous, retreating felt dangerous, standing still felt dangerous. Every broken contact raised suspicion. Every abandoned position felt like bait. The jungle, once their greatest ally, became a source of dread. One Japanese officer wrote in his journal, "We no longer know when the enemy is fleeing or waiting. The forest lies." By the third week of sustained fake retreat operations, Japanese casualty rates spiked dramatically while American losses dropped. Entire Japanese battalions were pinned in place, afraid to pursue, afraid to withdraw, slowly eroded by night raids and sudden strikes. The Marines had not just defeated units. They had broken decision-making. In one particularly devastating operation, Marines deliberately staged a chaotic retreat across open ground into a forested area. Japanese observers saw wounded men being carried, radios smashed, ammunition dumped. It looked like collapse. Japanese command committed a full battalion to the pursuit. What they did not know was that Marine engineers had spent nights preparing interlocking firing positions deep inside the forest. Fields of fire overlapped invisibly. Escape routes had been blocked with wire and mines disguised under leaves. When the Japanese battalion entered, the Marines did not spring the trap immediately. They waited. They allowed the entire force to enter. Then they sealed it. The fight that followed lasted less than 40 minutes. When it ended, over half the Japanese battalion was dead or wounded. The rest fled blindly in all directions, abandoning weapons and equipment. American losses were minimal. After that, Japanese patrol activity dropped sharply across the sector. Units refused to pursue without overwhelming support. Even then, fear lingered. The fake retreat had done what firepower alone could not. It had destroyed trust in instinct. And once a soldier cannot trust what he sees, the war is already lost. By the time Japanese commanders realized what was happening, the damage was already irreversible. The fake retreat had done more than kill men. It had shattered assumptions that Japanese jungle doctrine was built upon. For years, Japanese forces believed they understood American behavior. They believed Americans advanced cautiously, avoided close jungle fighting, and withdrew when pressure mounted. The fake retreat exploited that belief perfectly. After the first engagements, Japanese patrols began seeing retreat everywhere. Any American withdrawal, even a short repositioning, was now interpreted as an opportunity. Officers urged speed, aggression, pursuit. They believed momentum was everything, and each time they acted on that belief, the jungle swallowed them. The Marines refined the method. Sometimes the retreat lasted minutes, sometimes hours, sometimes an entire day. They learned exactly how much distance to give, how much noise to make, how much equipment to accidentally leave behind. A dropped helmet, a torn pack, a blood-stained bandage. Each item reinforced the illusion of panic and disorder. Japanese scouts followed eagerly. They believed they were hunting a broken enemy. Instead, they were being guided. The Marines never retreated in a straight line. They bent their paths around ravines, through choke points, across narrow ridges and into kill zones prepared days in advance. Claymore mines were buried beneath leaf litter. Machine guns were positioned to fire along natural funnels. Mortars were pre-registered to precise grid points. Every step of the fake retreat was measured. When the ambush was sprung, it was sudden and total. Japanese soldiers later described the sensation as the jungle turning solid around them. One moment they were advancing freely, rifles ready, voices raised. The next moment the ground erupted, gunfire slammed in from three sides, and escape routes vanished. Those who survived the first wave tried to pull back, only to find the path behind them blocked by Marines who had looped around silently and sealed the rear. The retreat was never real. Only the trap was. As word spread, Japanese commanders attempted to adapt. Orders were issued warning units not to pursue retreating Americans too aggressively. Scouts were told to halt, observe, and wait for artillery, but doctrine and instinct are hard to erase under fire. The jungle rewarded initiative and punished hesitation. Younger officers, eager to prove themselves, ignored caution. Veteran NCOs trusted their experience. Entire companies moved forward believing they had the Americans on the run. They never returned. One Japanese battalion vanished over the course of 3 days after repeatedly pursuing what they believed were fragmented Marine units. Recon patrols sent to locate them found abandoned rifles, blood trails, and silence. No bodies, no survivors. The jungle had taken them completely. The Marines, meanwhile, continued advancing, not through brute force but through deception. They learned that the fake retreat did something even more powerful than killing troops. It broke trust. Japanese units stopped trusting their own eyes. They stopped trusting reports. They stopped trusting movement. If Americans advanced, it could be a trap. If Americans withdrew, it was almost certainly a trap. If Americans were silent, it was terrifying. This paralysis slowed Japanese response times dramatically. Units hesitated, reinforcements arrived late, counterattacks lost coordination, supply routes became vulnerable. And the Marines exploited every second. One night, a Marine platoon deliberately exposed itself along a ridgeline, firing briefly before pulling back in visible disarray. Japanese scouts reported a full retreat. A company moved to pursue. The Marines withdrew just far enough. When the Japanese reached the ravine below the ridge, preset demolition charges collapsed the sides. Mortars opened fire. Machine guns cut down survivors trying to climb out. By dawn, the ravine was silent. Japanese after-action reports grew increasingly desperate. Words like deception, illusion, and false movement appeared repeatedly. One officer wrote, "The Americans retreat even when they are winning. This is incomprehensible." That incomprehension was the weapon. The fake retreat forced Japanese units into constant caution. Patrols became slower. Advances became hesitant. The jungle, once a source of confidence, became a maze of doubt. Some Japanese soldiers began refusing to pursue at all. They had seen too many units disappear, too many men cut down in moments of confidence. Officers responded with threats, but fear had already set in. The Marines noticed. They began using fake retreats even when no ambush followed. Sometimes they withdrew and did nothing at all. No attack, no fire, just silence. Japanese patrols waited for the trap that never came. That waiting drained morale even faster than casualties. By the later stages of the campaign, Japanese forces no longer responded aggressively to contact. They dug in, hoping to avoid pursuit entirely, but this allowed Marines to maneuver freely, bypass strongpoints, and isolate entire sections of the defense. The fake retreat had inverted the battlefield. The Japanese, once the masters of ambush, were now afraid to move. The Americans, once cautious in jungle warfare, now dictated tempo and direction. Even when Japanese units did manage to engage Marines directly, the fear of a sudden withdrawal undermined coordination. Attacks stalled, flanks went uncovered, units paused at critical moments, waiting to see if movement was real or staged. In war, hesitation kills. The fake retreat ensured hesitation became constant. Japanese survivors later described the tactic not as a trick, but as a curse. One veteran said, "We chased them for months, and they led us into nothing but death. Even when we stopped chasing, we could not stop seeing the retreat." By the time the campaign ended, the damage was irreversible. Japanese forces did not simply lose ground, they lost initiative, confidence, and belief in their own doctrine. The jungle no longer favored them. The Marines had turned motion into deception, retreat into a weapon, and pursuit into a liability. And long after the fighting ended, Japanese veterans remembered the moment everything changed, not when the Americans advanced, but when they turned their backs and walked away. Because that was when the trap truly began.